Hello, everyone. In this lecture, we are going to dive into the topic lipids, which is one of the four major classes of biomolecules that are essential for life. So, the four major biomolecules that we are discussing in this series of lectures include carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates we've already discussed, and here we are sharing the knowledge about lipids. And by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to understand that what exactly lipids are, what are the different types of lipids, and what are their different functions in the living bodies. So let's start. So talking about the definition of lipids, lipids are organic compounds that contain hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen atoms, which means that whenever you will look onto the structure of a lipid, you will find these three different kinds of elements. Now, the general property of all lipids is that they are insoluble in the aqueous solutions, that is something that has water, but they are soluble in non-polar solvents. And unlike proteins and other biomolecules, lipids are not polymers. As you know that when we talk about carbohydrates, they are made up of the smaller monomeric units called the monosaccharides. If we talk about proteins, they are made up of smaller monomeric units called amino acids, and nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides. But talking specifically about lipids, these are not polymers, which means that they do not have any specific kind of monomeric unit available on it, but rather they are small molecules made up of fatty acids. And that is what we are going to learn in this lecture. Now, before we actually understand the different types of lipids, we should first understand the basic constituent of a lipid molecule, that is a fatty acid. So what exactly is a fatty acid? Fatty acid is one of the major components of the triglyceride, which is a form of the lipid that is used in the body to store energy. And when we talk about a fatty acid, it is a hydrocarbon chain with a carboxyl end, which means that this has a long chain of hydrocarbons, as you can see here in the figure, and one end has a carboxylic acid attached to it. So whenever someone asks you what is a fatty acid, you'll say that it is a long hydrocarbon chain with a carboxyl end. So that is the general feature of a fatty acid. Now let's see that how exactly these are contributing towards the formation of the lipid molecules. So when we talk about the classification of lipids, there are three different types of lipids. The first is the simple lipids. Then we have compound lipids, which are also called complex lipids. We have the third category, derived lipids. So these are the three major categories of lipids. What are simple lipids? These are the esters of fatty acids. So when there is an esterification of the backbone of glycerol with different fatty acids, that is how the simple lipids are formed. They are further divided into fats and waxes. We don't have to dive deep into understanding the different functions and structures of fats and waxes, but we have to briefly look upon to the structures of the basic lipids. And then we have the compound lipids. Compound lipids are the lipids which are the esters of fatty acids and alcohol. But apart from that, they also have other groups attached to them, which we will see in the coming slides. The third category is derived lipids. And these are the lipids which are formed from the first and the second category of lipids, that is the simple lipids and compound lipids. So up till now, we've just made a foundation for the lipids, but in the next slides, we are going to see exactly that what exactly these three different types of lipids are made up of. So as I told you that the basic constituent of any lipid is a fatty acid. So if we talk about the fatty acids, these are further divided into two categories. The first is the saturated fatty acids and the second is the unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are the ones which only have single bonds present in its structure. As you can see on the screen, we have two examples mentioned. First is the palmitic acid and we have stearic acid. Palmitic acid has 16 carbons in it, and you can see that it is a long hydrocarbon chain, and then there is a carboxylic acid in it. And there is no double or triple bond present. Everything is having single bond. All the carbons are bonded together by single bonds. That is why they are saturated fatty acids. And the second one is the stearic acid. Stearic acid is having 18 carbons, and again, it is having a fatty acid. Now talking about the second class of fatty acids, which is unsaturated fatty acids. So we have three examples here on the screen. We have oleic acid, linoleic acid, and linolenic acid. Now these unsaturated fatty acids means that they do not, they, apart from the single bonds, they have double and triple bonds as well. Sorry, it's written wrong here. It's not only single bonds. It is that apart from the single bonds, they have double and triple bonds as well. In case of oleic acid, there are 18 carbons present, and there is also a presence of the double bond here. In linoleic acid, there are two double bonds present, and in case of linolenic acid, there are three double bonds present. So these are the unsaturated fatty acids. When we divide the unsaturated fatty acids into further categories, we have polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are also known as PUFAs. And then we have monounsaturated fatty acids, which means MUFAs. Polyunsaturated fatty acids include omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. And the examples are listed here on the screen. And the monounsaturated fatty acids are the omega-9 fatty acids. And most of the fatty acids, they have an even number of carbon atoms present in it, because when the fatty acids are being biosynthesized in the body, they are formed by the combination of two carbon atoms. And this you will see when you talk about the metabolism of lipids. So now that you've understood that what is a fatty acid and how the structure is made up of and what are the different classes of the lipids, we will now see on to examples, the major examples of each type of lipids. So the first category is the simple lipids. Now the most important example of a simple lipid is the triglyceride. And triglyceride is a lipid molecule which is made up of 1 unit of glycerol when three fatty acids attached to it. So let's try to understand that what I'm trying to say here. So there is this glycerol molecule, as you can see, 3 carbons, and there are these alcohol groups present on it. Now onto these alcohol groups, there will be three different fatty acids. Now, remember that these three fatty acids can be same or they can be different. It just depends on the type of simple lipid we are talking about. But here we are going to generalize the thing. So there are these three fatty acids, and these are going to do the esterification here, and the ester will be formed. Now you can see that here water has been removed, and here is a bond of here is an ester bond formation happening on the 3 carbon atoms. So that is how the triglyceride is formed. So when fatty acids join to the alcohol groups of the glycerol, the ester is formed, and this is known as the triglyceride. And this is the high efficiency storage fuel. So the fats that are stored in the body, they are primarily the triglycerides. So they are formed in this way. And triglycerides store 6 times as much energy as does the glycogen, because they are deposited in highly reduced and anhydrous form. So if I have to summarize this, simple lipids are the esters of fatty acids with alcohols. And alcohol here we are talking about glycerol in case of triglyceride. Now, in this figure, I have represented the fatty acid as this carboxylic group, and the R group is basically the long hydrocarbon chain that we discussed in the previous slides. But if I have to show you a rough idea of that, how exactly the fatty acid is looking like when it is attaching to the glycerol backbone, you can see here in the figure. So these are the long fatty acid chains. This is the ester bond formation, and this is the glycerol backbone. This is one of the examples. The next class of lipids is the compound lipids, or we also call it as the complex lipids. And these are the esters of fatty acids that contain additional groups other than the alcohol and the fatty acid. So in case of simple lipids, you saw that on the alcohol backbone, we are having fatty acids attached. But when there is another group, apart from these two types of groups present, then that will be called as a compound lipid. So the most important example of a compound lipid is the phospholipid. And this is the major component of the cell lipid bilayer. And phospholipids basically means that with the lipid, there is a phosphorus group attached. So as you can see here, this is how the cell membrane is formed. And how it is forming, it's just the same as we discussed in simple lipids. We have this glycerol backbone, then we have these two fatty acids, long fatty acids chains, but the third fatty acid has been replaced by a hydrophilic head, which is the phosphate group, right? So now, because there is a phosphate group present here, that is why they will be called as the phospholipids. And that is how the cell membrane is formed, where this phosphate group is acting as the hydrophilic head, and the fatty acids attached to the two other carbon atoms are basically constituting the hydrophobic tail of the units of the cell membrane. The next one is the glycolipids. Glyco is referring to sugar molecule. So the lipids that contain a fatty acid and a carbohydrate are known as the glycolipids. And these are found on the outer surface of the cellular membranes, where they are playing an important role in the structure and maintenance of the membrane stability, as you can see here. It is also responsible for facilitating the cell-to-cell communication. Some other examples of compound lipids include lipoproteins. Now, lipoproteins are the important types of lipids in the body that are responsible for transporting the fat molecules from one place to another. The third category of lipids is the derived lipids. And these are the compounds that are produced by the hydrolysis of the simple and the complex lipids. And the most important example under this category is the cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is basically having a structure somewhat like this. You don't have to remember the structure, but just for your reference, I have added it here. So what is the important function of cholesterol? It is that it provides rigidity to the cell membrane. It helps to maintain the stability of the cell membrane. If the cholesterol was not there, then the cell membrane would not have been that rigid and anything would have been able to pass through it. And some other examples of derived lipids include hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Testosterone is also one of them. Now, let's see what are the different functions of lipids in the body. Number one, it is responsible for storage of energy, primarily for long-term use, such as the triglycerides. That's the fat that we reserve in the body for longer term use. Then we have the hormonal roles, for example, steroids such as estrogen and testosterone. It also provides insulation, sorry. It provides insulation. It is responsible for regulating the temperature of the body by not letting the heat touch the organs. Then it also is responsible for protection of the internal organs, and it's also a part of the structure of the cell. For example, the phospholipids and cholesterol. So what we learned in this lecture, let's try to summarize it quickly. So we first saw that what is the definition of lipids. Lipids are the organic compounds which are insoluble in aqueous solutions, but they are soluble in non-polar solvents. And unlike other biomolecules, they are not polymers, but rather small molecules. Then we tried to see that what is the basic constituent of every lipid, and that is a fatty acid. And what is a fatty acid? Fatty acid is a hydrocarbon chain with a carboxyl end. Then we tried to see that what are the different types of lipids. We have simple lipids, compound lipids, and derived lipids. Before we dived into each class, we saw the definition of fatty acid and also the types of fatty acids, the saturated and unsaturated, and how they look like. Then we saw the example of triglyceride in case of simple lipids, and we saw that how the ester is formed by the combination of fatty acids onto the glycerol by the formation of ester bonds between them. Then we saw the compound lipids, which means that other than the alcohol and the fatty acid, there is going to be another type of groups present. For example, phospholipids, in which phosphate is present. That is an important part of the lipid bilayer. Then we saw glycolipids, in which carbohydrate will be present apart from the alcohol and the fatty acid. Then we saw lipoproteins, which means that other than the lipids, there will be proteins attached. And the third category we saw at last, which is the derived lipids. And these are the ones that are produced by the hydrolysis of simple and complex lipids. And the major example includes cholesterol, which is responsible for providing rigidity to the cell membrane.